Anyway, welcome to Fort Concho. My name is Michael Smith. I'll be your guide tonight. Just some really rough preliminary stuff. Fort Concho was founded in 1867, 2 years after the Civil War. It was mainly to protect all these people on the Texas frontier as they traveled westward and whatnot to the different places. As you can imagine, it was kind of a rough and sometimes violent existence. So it was just a way of life down here. And then the town of San Angelo, or Santa Angela as it was called back then, or even across the river by the soldiers, started just a few years after Fort Concho. So the benefit was that the soldiers came here, did all the hard work, provided the presence of, just the soldier presence to protect everybody, and gave, the citizens of San Angelo the opportunity to found a town. Oh, good. So they had the opportunity to found a town because of the hard work of these soldiers. And then when the town did become hopping and stuff like that, a lot of soldiers would frequent there and spend a lot of their hard-earned money. They didn't call this Fort Concho when they served here. Most of the soldiers called it the government workhouse. So for $13 a month, they did a whole lot of work besides just what normal soldiers would do today. So by the time they'd go to town and spend all their money and get treated horribly sometimes, they started, resent that and, just have bad feelings towards the town folk. And it was reciprocated by the town folk. Once in a while, a soldier would get killed, and it was just not much would be done by the town to solve the crime or whatever. Or sometimes the crooks would get away, and the soldiers resented this, and sometimes caused riots and things like that. We can talk about those as we go along. One of the first murders here at Fort Concho was what they would call a blue-on-blue murder back then, or friendly fire by today's standards. Apparently, one of the members of the regimental band, we're trying to decipher what his name is because all the forms he signed, we can't read his writing. We know he's from Württemberg, Germany, as well as the man he killed, a fellow by the name of Gottlieb Appenzeller. Now, they both came from the same town in Germany, and somehow here at Fort Concho, because it was a little bit before the town got started, they got in some kind of tussle, and Gottlieb was killed, and he's one of the first few people buried here at the Fort Concho Cemetery. Now, I should mention that that was located about a block and a half southwest here where that auto glass shop is. And in 1885, all the bodies were exhumed and moved down to Fort Sam Houston, so there's no bodies remain here that we know of. Now, again, there was a lot of rough stuff going on downtown between the soldiers and the townfolk themselves. One of the earliest ones, actually, there was a riot in the late 1870s because the soldiers were getting tired of the way they got treated. One of the soldiers, First Sergeant Goldsby of D Company of the 10th Cavalry, released a bunch of carbines to the men, and they went up to the town and started shooting it up.
What's the car behind you?
One of their weapons.
No, there's a car behind you.
Oh. Well, thank you. Now, what had happened is some of the Texas Rangers or just some rough people had gone to one of the bars and found some of the Buffalo soldiers dancing with the ladies. They also they took exception to this, and they found one of the sergeants for the group and tore off his stripes of his blouse and his pants and sent him running. So the soldiers really got mad about that, and First Sergeant Goldsby released all these weapons, and they went to town and shot it up. It didn't end there. A few years later, in the 1881, 1882, there was a series of murders, starting with Private Galvin getting his throat slit. Right after that, Hiram Pender was killed in the town. And then the most notorious, and probably documented, was William Watkins. He was a soldier with the 10th Cavalry, I believe, and he played banjo at some of the saloons to help get drinks and stuff like that because the soldiers' pay was very poor at that time. So he would play a little bit of the banjo to get some drinks, and he was tired of playing. He was ready to come back home. And as the story goes, one of the ranchers, the local ranchers named Tom McCarthy, pulled out a gun and told him he was going to stay and play longer. And he told me he didn't want to, he was going to go home. And then something happened. He shoots Watkins in the back of the head. And there's a huge trial. He gets arrested. It's a big hullabaloo. All the soldiers are really upset. And they put him in jail. Now, in the meantime, one of our doctors, Dr. Samuel Smith, he had done some forensic science, determined that the bullet that he took out of Watkins was a match for the gun that owned by Tom McCarthy. Now, Tom McCarthy's defense was that his gun was a special English gun with a very loose trigger, so it was just an accidental discharge. And then around that time, when things started to settle down, his brother came into town, Joe McCarthy, who looked almost exactly like Tom McCarthy. It really spooked the soldiers. They were upset. They stormed the town again, and they were going to get him out of the sheriff's office and lynch him. But thankfully, or for Tom McCarthy at least, the sheriff had suspected that and moved him to a safer location before the trial. And of course, as the trial went on, all the evidence came out and stuff, but he was cleared. A lot of people, vouched for his reputation and whatnot because he was a wealthy rancher, and Watkins was, Buffalo soldier in the 10th Cavalry, so they didn't take too much credence to the soldiers around here. And that really offended a lot of the soldiers, all their hard work, and this is the way they're getting treated. And so again, they did storm the town again, shooting up several of the hotels, several of the other establishments and saloons until they finally came back this way. And it wasn't just the Buffalo soldiers, it was all the soldiers, because a crime against one of the soldiers was a crime against all of them. And this time the riot was so bad it made the New York papers. They had printed out a flyer basically telling all the people of San Angelo's, don't mess with us, or we're gonna take you out the hard way or whatever. And this got enough attention for New York papers to print it up, talking about the violence down here at San Angelo. I didn't get quite near as I wanted to go. Any questions so far? None? Now I should mention that First Sergeant Goldsby was famous for another reason. While he was here, he gave birth to his son, and what his name was isn't really that important, but later on in life his son became a man named Cherokee Bill, one of the most dangerous outlaws here in the Concho Valley. By the time he was 19, he had killed 7 men, and he didn't live much longer past that though. So who knows how vicious and violent this man would have been. But he grew up here. He played with the other children at the Fort Concho as he was growing up. So this was his home. And that's just one of the other little colorful characters here. Now this big empty spot right here used to be one of the barracks. Barracks 3 was right there, and Barracks 4 was right over here. Now I tell you this because after the fort was closed down, they turned Barracks 3 into a hotel, the Fort Concho Hotel, and they added a second story on there. And at one point it caught fire because it was all wood. And then after that, the building became too dangerous to keep it up, so we had to knock it down. But with all the activity of it being a hotel, who knows what sort of stuff went on there, especially one of these old Wild West towns. And then also I should point out, right about there where those lights are, not the big street lights, but that one right there on the corner of the building, would have been corral number 1. After Randall McKenzie went up to Paladuro Canyon and captured a bunch of the Kiowa and Comanche women and children, they brought them down here and kept them in captivity for over 5-6 months, November to March or April. And so they were kept there for a long time. While they were there, 8 of them died, and the soldiers on sentry could hear every now and then bird calls coming from inside the corral and outside the corral as the menfolk were around, communicating with their women, making sure they were all right before they made the trip to the reservation. So that's another group of the dead. Fort Concho. Any questions yet? Or observations? We're about to get over here to Barracks 5, and this is one of the buildings that has some activity of some sort. I've actually seen some stuff myself, heard a few things. But when you work in these old buildings, after a while, some things you can start to explain. For example, when I first got here, I'd walk on the floorboards and then sit down and wait for visitors to come through. Then 10 or 15 minutes later, sometimes I'd hear footsteps like someone was walking along the same floor I'd just passed. Turned out, in the colder days, the wood contracts, and as you step on it, it stays down, stuck with the other boards. And as it heats up later, it pops back up to its original position and sounds just like someone's walking. So I was able to explain away some of these things, but other things you just can't quite explain.